فلاقتحم العقبة وما أدراك ما العقبة فك رقبة أو إطعام في يوم ذي مسغبة يتيما ذا مقربة أو مسكينا ذا متربة ثم كان من الذين آمنوا وتواصوا بالصبر وتواصوا بالمرحمة ثم كان من الذين آمنوا وتواصوا بالصبر وتواصوا بالمرحمة أولئك أصحاب الميمنة والذين كفروا بآياتنا هم أصحاب المشأمة عليهم نار مؤصدة صدق الله العلي العظيم ربنا اغفر لي ولوالدي وللمؤمنين يوم يقوم الحساب برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.
MashaAllah, brother, MashaAllah, Baradigar, Salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. We are here to commemorate the great sacrifice of Maulana Hussain alayhi salam and his loyal companion and his family member for the sake of Islam, to save Islam from evils. Today, sowing of Shahidan in Karbala, our Rasul extended the grief and sorrow today after the Shuhada of Maulana Hussain alayhi salam and other companion of Imam. There was a harsh treatment with the family of Imam Hussain alayhi salam in Karbala, snatching of their personal belongings, even their hijab too. Fourth Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam and holy ladies were arrested, taking them as captives and prisoner of war, and they were put in chain and they were forced to march barefooted and bareheaded. Rasulullah, daughter of Rasulullah to Kufa, and from Kufa to Damish, Sayyidah Zainab, while she was addressing in a Yazid court, she said, "Oh, son of Mawiya, I am watching, you can never stop the zikr of Ahlul Bayt, inshallah." Our majalas, our sozo salam, our poetry, doha, recitation, matam, tears, all of our way of commemoration. May Allah accept all our efforts, and may Allah accept your donation, charity, tabarak, niyaz. May Allah increase your tawfiqat. By Muhammad wa ahli bayt Muhammad salawat. Allahumma salli ala उनको मेरे हुसैन ने ऐसा बदल दिया, उनको मेरे हुसैन ने ऐसा बदल दिया, नजरें वहीं रही, नजरिया बदल दिया। कातल के घर में वफा करके मजलिसे हुसैन, कातल के घर में वफा करके मजलिसे हुसैन, बिनते अली ने उनका बदला बदल दिया। बाय मोहम्मद व अहले बैत मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु I would like to invite Brother Moon to recite Salam, Brother Moon, by Muhammad wa ahle bayt Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
شهداء الإسلام صلوات
اللهم صل على محمد
Prayers to the Bibi Zainab Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
गुरबत में कत्ल हो गया मजलूम बेवतन मैं भाई भाई कहती थी लाशा बहन बहन मैं भाई भाई कहती थी लाशा बहन बहन तीरों पे था रखा हुआ शाह हुसैन का डूबा हुआ लहू में था कुर्ता हुसैन का आवाज थी हुसैन की पहना कफन कफन मैं भाई भाई कहती थी लाशा बहन बहन आई नाराज हो गई परदेस की फिजा कुर्बा शहीद हो गया मेरा घर उजड़ गया परदेस देश है लिखा अपना वतन वतन मैं भाई भाई कहती थी लाशा बहन बहन एक दिन के दाग मैंने 72 उठा लिए कुछ दाग मैंने कल्ब के अंदर छुपा लिए छुपते नहीं छुपाने से दाग के रसन रसन मैं भाई भाई कहती थी लाशा बहन बहन देखा है बाबा मैंने जो मंजर बताऊं क्या नेज़ों पे था रखा हुआ सर शहीद का घोड़ों के दौड़ने से था टुकड़े बदन बदन मैं भाई भाई कहती थी लाशा बहन बहन कासिम की लाश लाए थे दामन में शहदी सेहरे से बेनियाज तीनों शाह की जमी एक शब भी रह न पाई न जिसकी बुलहन बुलहन मैं भाई भाई कहती थी लाशा बहन पर्ची करे जाए अली अकबर में जब लगी बाबा को दी सदा कभी आवाज मुझको दी कहता था सीना थाम के अम्मा चुभन चुभन मैं भाई भाई कहती थी लाशा बहन बहन रब्बर सलाम
माशाअल्लाह पारदीगर सलावत इस्लाम सोग में है रोती बदूक है, इस्लाम सोग में है रोती बदूक है, कत्ले हुसैन असल में कत्ले रसूल है. Now I would like to invite brother Nader Shah to recite salam. Brother Nader Shah, पर मोहम्मद वाले बाद मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
برای خوشنودی ارواح ایمه شهدا علی الخصوص ابا عبدالله الحسین صلوات.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
برای خوشنودی امام زمان تمجید و فرج ولی است صلوات دیگر.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali
الله وجودنا ووجودكم صالح ابا عبد الله الحسين عليه الصلاه والسلام وشهداء كربلاء. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد حمد الشاكرين على مصابهم. الحمد لله عظيم وزية وارزقنا شفاعة الحسين يوم البروج وثبت قدم الصدق عندك مع الحسين وأصحاب الحسين الذي بذلوا موته دون الحسين عليه الصلاة والسلام. مؤمنين وشيعيان وپیروان راستی اهل بیت علیهم السلام در شب‌های جمعه به طور معمول دعای کمیل قرائت این دعای بسیار مهم و با اهمیت توسط حضرت خضر علیه السلام و امیر المؤمنین علی بن ابی طالب تعیین شد و حضرت امیر المؤمنین علیه السلام و علی و کمیل ابن زیاد این دعای بسیار مقبول و مهم و با اهمیت را تعلیم فرمود. در این دعا خواسته های خیلی زیاد مطرح می شود. مؤمنین و شیعیان و پیروان اهل بیت از خدا چیزهای خیلی مهمی را می خواهد. از جمله در اواخر دعا می خوانیم یا من اسمه دوا و ذکره شفا و طاعته بنا ارحم رأس ماله الرجا و صلاح البکا یا صابع النعم یا دافع النقم یا نور المستوحشین فی الظلم. اصلا علمی یک آیه از این بسیار مهم و با اهمیت که درباره عبدالله الحسین است و مؤمنین چطور از طریق عبدالله الحسین برای راست هدایت می شود و شفاعت ابو عبدالله الحسین شامل حال مؤمنین می شود. رسول الله فرمود ان الحسین مصباح الهدى و سفینة النجات. یا رسول الله فرمود ان الحسین سید الشباب اهل الجنه. بعد نور المستوحشین فی الظلم میخوانیم یا عالما لا یعلم صل علی محمد و آل محمد. اللهم صل علی امام حسین علیه السلام دروازه اسلام است. دروازه ابو عبدالله حسین دروازه محمد آل محمد. این رحمت و این نعمت توسط رسول مکرم اسلام و مادر بزرگوارش فاطمه زهرا و شریان‌های حضرت امام حسین حسنین تزریق شدند. شهادت امام حسین با فلسفه‌های مهم و بسیار با اهمیت دارد که توسط علما و فضلا در رشته تحریر درآمده، نوشته شده. از جمله خصوصا این آمدن ما و شما در این حسینیه، در این مسجد، این مکان مقدس برای چیست؟ و ما یک چیزی کم داریم. حتما میخواهیم که این خانگاه ها را توسل به حضرت امام حسین و توسل به اهل بیت علیهم السلام ما پر کنیم خانگاه ها. امام حسین علیه السلام خب رسول الله میگه اگر کسی یک حرف اشکی میریزه برای امام حسین، بیشک که شفاعت من نصیب خالق میشه. و همچنان امام معصومی مثل علی از ابی طالب اولاد امام جعفر صادق علیه السلام همه این را تاکید کردند درباره اشک ریختن برای امام حسین علیه السلام، یا مثلا سینه زدن، یا مثلا با نظم و نظرات ولو یک قطره آبی و یاد شهدای کربلا کسی می‌دهد، خلاصه این حساب میشه. من دوست دارم که یک داستان خیلی مهم و عجیبی رو با شما شریک شوم که البته خیلی مهم است. البته ما و شما نیاز داریم به هدایت و هدایتگر و سفینه نجات و کشتی نجات یا عبدالله حسین علیه السلام و این چراغی را که توسط خدا روشن شده در جهان. خیلی ها آمدن، بنی امیه، بنی عباس، بعد از او خلاصه چی دسته های دیوانه ها آمدن که میخواستن خاموش کنه این نور را، نتونستن ما. و مثلا این روز گروه به نام دیوانه به نام طالبان بنی عباس در افغانستان دارد، اونا میخواه خاموش کنه. اول میخواستن 20 سال جلوتر خاموش کنه و نور حسین را کسی نمیتونه خاموش کنه. واقعا از اینجا اگر مثل چشمه آبی میمانه که اینجا ببنده، سر از جای دیگر در میره. خب اگر حالا ما ببینیم که واقعا حسین چی کار میکنه، اینجا خواندیم که یا نور المستوحشین فی الظلم، شب اول قبل چجوری حضرت امام حسین برای کسایی که سینه میزنه، کسایی که گریه میکنه و دیدنش و زیارتش میره. این داستانی هست که از 5 تا کتاب از چی متخصص پروفسور ایرانی میگه که البته از علمای بزرگ ایرانی در سر منبر صحبت میکرد. درست که این 5 تا دکتر نیت کردن که هر سال برای زیارت اربعینی چیلوم امام حسین علیه السلام در ایران. یکی از اربعین ها چیلوم اینا رفتن میگه رفتیم اینجا دنبال خانه میگشتن در کربلا. یک پیرمردی آمد که شما کجایی میرن؟ خوش آمدید. بعد شما دنبال خانه میگشتن. گریه رو شروع کرد. گریه ایدی نه اینکه گریه عادی، مثل که استره رو میگیره خلاصه اینجوری فشار میدی اینجوری آب میپاشه به صورت دارد. بعد گفت من خانه رو میفهمم. بعد خانه جناب سالونیزی که داخل شده میگه رفت برای غذا آماده کردن، رفتن غذا آماده کنن. اینجا بود که دیدیم یک پوستر یا عکس در بغل دیوار جنازه مرده اطراف رسیدن پشواز کردن میبینن. بعد گفتیم رو باید سوال کنیم. آدم یک توری است که هم اشتریختن رسید که فشارها و هم این جنازه چطوری است کی از خودت اگر خب آمد غذا را آورد دستخوان پهن کرد. گفتیم ما نمیخوریم غذا الا ای که در حال گستر یا عکس برای ما به طور روشن صحبت کنید. نه شما مطلب نداریم که زوال حسین ناراحت شد ما سفلا بکنیم وقت نه آخر قسم داریم با عبدالله حسین یک خیلی پس ما صحبت دیگه من قبل از آدمی خیلی بد آدمی خیلی بی‌بنزبا خصوصا روزهای تنبعینی ایام اربعین خانه‌های مردم حمله می‌کرد و خانه‌هایی که زوار و شب و سفرهای زیارت دوستی می‌کرد هر چی بود داشت اون نیاز می‌گفتن یک سال هم اما چند سال جلوتر اگر برای این شب نشستن فکر کردم این که کار ناجوان مردانه شما می‌رید خانه‌های زوال محسن خالی می‌کنید می‌دونید این واقعا ظلمه تا چی وقت باید خیر شد بعضی انسان‌ها واقعا عجیب و غریبه که ولو موی سرش سفید شود پای لبی بر برسه در حال نمیاره اما خوشا به ساعت موی کسایی که تغییر نفسی اصلاح میکنن تو آن میگه حتی جمعه رو ما بیانیم بذاره هیچ کس هیچ قومی رو حالتش تغییر نمیده ایلا که او در حالات خود تغییر کرد یک اصلاح میکنه یک خانه تکانی میکنه قلب نیاز به خانه تکانی داره خلاصه میگه که اینجا نشستن و رسول الله چی میگه در میگه که لحظه تفکر اول من 70 سنه عبادت یعنی یک لحظه فکری در راه راست در راه خدا بهتر است از 70 سال عبادت بعد این بود و با آدمی که راه امام حسین بسته کرد ولی در یک لحظه یک جریقه آمد نور هدایت از سر عبدالله حسین رفت توبه کرد و خدا توبهش پذیرفت پر شهید شد بعد این مردم میگه که رفتم صبحش رفتن طرف حرم اینجوری مواقع زیاده موقعی ها که میبینم من میگه آدم بد هست و سریش بودیم خانه مردم میبینیم آمده باز چی بود میگه من دیلش تا یک موقع رسید یک جان آمد جون کرد جان بود هست سفرت برو تو برای چی آمده زید من اینجا دلیم شکست خیلی گریه کرد پیرمرد داخلی موقعی خیمه آمد بیرون بود دلت نشکن جوان برو ما شکر نداریم موقعی شکرش تمام شده 2 کیلو شکر رفتم میگه از دکان 2 کیلو شکر گرفتم آمود در راه یک جوان دیگر آمد خیلی شکر ما نداشتیم موقعی ما شکر گریفت رفت خدای چیکار دوباره رفتم گرفتم 2 کیلو شکر آمدم پس نزدیک موقعی رسیدیم اینجا این حضرت اسرائیل آمد ملک الموت من قبض‌الله کرد افتادم و واسه روحی میبینه چیکار زنگ زدن امرجنسی و آمبولانس و این طرف من داشتم بودم که مذهبی خدا سکیدی که فقص کردم موزد حالاش بعد خلاصه من بودم رسالخانه و اصول دیادمی کفن کردم کفستان در تعلیم قبل ما داشتیم و دیدم این جای میگه یک دفعه یادم امام حسین داریم من توقع یا عبدالله حسین اینجا میگه ملک الموت آمده من چی شد سر در هر پایین میکنه و اینا سوالات بعد میگه که دوم در پریشان حسین یا امام حسین آمد میگه که این نور نزدیک آمد این متملکت رو تبرد از من امام حسین آمد و سوال کرد از من فرضی که آمد ملک نکی رو که شما چی کار دفترش همه سیاهی سفیدی نداره. از این سوال کنیم میبریم طرف رایگاه جهنم. نه دیگه ما حالت هستیم من شفاعت شدیم چطور گفتی توبه کرد توبه خالصانه انسان آخر اینما الاعمال بالنیات نیت انسان نکرد صاحب باشه هر کاری بعد بکنه توبه کرد خلاص خداوند قبول میکنه اما از روی لعنت ای زبان استغفر الله اعدار و هیچ فایده نداره خدا شد اما توبه باشه امام حسین گفتی توبه کرده خلاصه گفت که نه نگاه کنی یا رسول الله میزان حسناتش کلا صفر و سیئاتش آمده پایین چیکار 2 کیلو شکر خرید امام حسین 2 کیلو شکر گفتی کفایت نمیکنه دانه حساب کنید این ده حسناتش و شروع کردن حساب کردن هنوز کفایت گفت 2 کیلو دیگر موجود بود در موقع بسید حتی اسرائیل آمد اونم حساب کرد گفت کفایت نمیکنه بعد گفت که کفایت نمیکنه باید داره کنه حسین بعد میگه از زیر انواعش بیرون چند خلطه و کیسه شکر انواع بکنن حساب کردن روی میزان حسنات انداخت کناره دید که میزان حسنات رفت ماشاءالله در 100 درجه بالا و سیئات صفر شد بعد امام حسین گفت خداوند اجازه داده که این آدم برگردن تا درس عبرت برای همه مجتمع حسینی شد من برگردم حالا این دعای کنه بسیار دعای در اهلیت خصوص در بندی یا نور مستوفشین بیسوله در دعاهای دیگری هم هست که می‌بینیم در رابطه با عبدالله حسین و احادیث و روایات معتبری که امام حسین علیه السلام چجوری انسان‌ها شفاعت کرده از علمای قدیم مثل مرعشی نجفی رحمة الله علیه سکسواری و علامه حکیمی و سید حکیم و غیر و همهش داستانهایش و حالات عبادالله حسین اگر بکنیم که چجوری شفاعت کرده واقعا انسان یعنی تکان میخوره خلاصه امیدوار میشه پس همه ما شما امید داشته باشید دیگر خب وقتی شریف شما نمیگید همیشه دعا کنید که اللهم خیارت حسین و فی الآخر شفاعت حسین اگر شفاعت امام حسین خلاص انشاءالله تعالی که در شب اول هر ما شما نورانی میشه انشاءالله خداوند تعالی هر ما شما نورانی و نور حضرت پیامبر بزرگ و اهل بیت بخواهد خصوصا امام حسین علیه السلام و قلبی امام مسلمان را همه ما شما انشاءالله خرم و خوشنود بفرماید و این سینه زنی ها و جمع شدن ما شما این نوحسرایی و به این قرآن و استدعاها خدا و این نظم و همه ما شما قبول فرماید و پدران و مادران و مردمینی که در عالم برزخ و واقعا عالم برزخ خیلی سخت برای مسلمین و مؤمنین خدای یا الله حق عبدالله حسین عالم برزخ از اونا را سهل و آسان بفرما به برکت صلوات علی محمد
ماشاءالله برادر نامزد شما ماشاءالله بار دیگر صلوات
اللهم صل على محمد وآل
سیدہ زینب سلام اللہ علیہ کی شان چند شاخ اسلام کا سرمایہ تسکین ہے زینب اسلام کا سرمایہ تسکین ہے زینب حیدر کے خط و حال کی تدقین ہے زینب شبیر ہے قرآن تو یاسین ہے زینب ये गुलशन इस्मत की वो मासूम कली है, तत्हीर में ज़हरा है तो तेवर में अली है। वर मोहम्मद व अहले बैत मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम। I would like to invite Brother Iyaz Hashmi to recite Salam. Okay. So I will request Brother Minhal Raza to recite Salam for Muhammad wa Ahl Muhammad Salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
Hussainiyat Zindabad. Hussainiyat
Zindabad.
Nasibiyat
Murdabad.
Nasibiyat Murdabad. Evet, Düşman Medanat Beşman.
محمد وآل محمد صلوات
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
ये मातम की सदा जिंदा रखेगी, ये मातम की सदा जिंदा रखेगी, हमें करबो भला जिंदा रखेगी। अलम के साथ में आजा के तुझको, अलम के साए में आजा के तुझको, हरे की हवा जिंदा रखेगी, हरे की हवा जिंदा रखेगी। अज़ा शबीर की मरने न देगी, दुआए सैयदा जिंदा रखेगी। मैं दुनिया से चला जाऊंगा लेकिन, मैं दुनिया से चला जाऊंगा लेकिन, मुझे शह की रज़ा जिंदा रखेगी। मुझे शह की रज़ा जिंदा रखेगी। सुहैल अपने कफन में साथ ले
जा तुझे खाके शिफा जिंदा रखेगी ये मातम की सदा जिंदा रखेगी पर मोहम्मद व आल मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु
MashaAllah, brother. MashaAllah, Baridigar, Salawat. We are very thankful to all volunteers with their great effort. It is possible to make this program successful. We are thankful to youth council, youth coordinator, ladies council, chair lady, parking volunteers, cleaning and packing food volunteers, donation collectors, and all participants, Matmi and Noha and Salam reciter. May Allah increase your tawfiqat for Muhammad wa Muhammad salawat. And we are very thankful to Maulana Saleem Bhimji to recite such a informative and full of knowledge lectures and convey the message of Ahlul Bayt and Quran tremendously. First, Sayyidul Salam ji, Ulmai Haq, Bulantar, Salawat. Another announcement by Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad Salawat. Tomorrow we have a Majlis Risale Swab of the father of sister Seema and the father-in-law brother Humayun Zaidi, Marhum Sayyid Abbas Naqvi, Ibn Ali Abbas Naqvi. Majlis will start after Maghrib, inshallah. Maulana Saleem Bhimji will recite this Majlis by Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad Salawat. And today Majlis and Tabarak is sponsored by brother Shoklat Zaidi, brother Ammar Zaidi, brother Riaz Abbas, brother Mehdi Hussain, brother Sajjad Badaif, brother Akhtar Hussain. Please recite Surah Fatiha for their marhumeen. Ma salawat. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad salawat. And another announcement, during Ashrai Muharram, by your charity and donation, mashallah, we collect 30,600. 30,600. May Allah increase your tawfiqat for Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad salawat. खुदा करे कि वो मोजज नमा आए, खुदा करे कि वो मोजज नमा आए, अलम उठाए हुए इब्ने मुस्तफा आए। यजीद वक्त से लड़े हुसैन की सूरत, यजीद वक्त से लड़े हुसैन की सूरत, खुदा के दीन की कश्ती का नाम खुदा आए। वर मोहम्मद व अहले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु I would like to invite Jamaat Islam wal Muslimin Maulana Saleem Bhimji to recite Majlis Ismail tonight for Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad salawat. Narae Takbir, Narae Risalat, Narae Hadari, Hussainiyat, Hussainiyat, يزيدية يزيدية بل محمد وعلى بيت محمد صلوات
محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وشفيع المذنبين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين لا سيما مولانا وسيدي صاحب العصر والزمان روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء وأجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف ولعنة دائمة على أعدائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. For the hastening of the return of our 12th Imam, Imam al-Hujjah, the savior of our time, one salawat upon Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. This evening, I wanted to actually do what I traditionally do in these the final lectures that I have been for Muharram. That is to really provide a summary or an overview of the topics that we had covered over the last 10 nights, and kind of maybe elaborate on some of the points before we get to the final part of the program this evening. As you'll recall that our theme this year was about living Islam, the practicality of living Islam in our era. We were basing our series on chapter number 71, Surah Luke, verse number 3, in which Prophet Noah alayhi salam was quoted as speaking to his community and saying, as defining what religion was, he says, "Ani'budullaha wattaquhu wa ati'un." To have the worship of Allah, and as we mentioned, that it is not only worship of Allah or ibadah, but it is also to know Allah, to have the ma'rifat of Allah. It is to have the consciousness of Allah, the taqwa, to fulfill the obligations that we have as believers, and also the last part, which was to also have the obedience to the prophets. So we talked about the fact that religion, and in our case, obviously Islam, as brought by the Prophet of Islam, and has been protected by the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, it is a religion which covers these three main areas: the aqaid, which is our belief system; it's the akhlaq, the ethics, the morality of religion; and the third part was the ahkam, the fiqh, the daily jurisprudence. And then all three of these have to be synchronized to our lives. We can't ever say that we will take one aspect of Islam and leave the others. The example I like to give is if you go to a restaurant, which is an all-you-can-eat buffet. They have a buffet restaurant, they have all the food laid out. And if you don't like particular food, you don't eat it, right? If you don't like vegetables, you'll stay away from the salad bar, for example, at the restaurant. Or if there's a kind of food you don't like, you won't go to that part of the food or to the all-you-can-eat buffet and take that food. But Islam is not like that. Islam is a full meal deal. It is a complete package. Right? As Allah says in the Quran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you who believe, He says, Udkhulu fi silmi kafa. Enter into silm, into peace, into submission, completely, wholeheartedly, in its totality. So as Muslims, we obviously have to recognize that despite the fact that, as I said, that religion is sometimes difficult to follow, there are challenges, especially when we live in a society like Canada, where it is difficult to put practices of Islam into our daily lives. But we need to make the best of it and try the best to implement the learnings once we have learned them. But we always recognize that, as the hadith tell us, al-Islam huwa taslim, that Islam means submission, that we have to submit to the entire religion. We don't pick and choose what we like. We don't say, for example, well, I don't like to grow a beard, Or I don't like to, for example, keep my beard, I need to shave it, I want to shave it to look modern, to look fashionable, right? It's a part of the religion, and we can't get away from that. Sometimes our sisters say, well, you know what, I don't want to wear hijab because it would maybe compromise my work. It will compromise my ability or my options in getting promotions at work. And obviously, at the end of the day, we recognize hijab as a wajibat of Islam. It's mentioned in the Quran in at least 3 instances. So nobody can say there's no ayat of the Quran about hijab. Yes, the word hijab is not used in the Quran. Well, it is used, but it's used in the meaning of like a curtain, a parda. So it doesn't mean hijab as in what the women wear. This is more of a Western creation. They use that word to describe the women's attire. But nonetheless, the Quran speaks about hijab in at least 3 instances for the women, at least 1 instance for the men. There's also a hijab mentioned in the Quran in Surah An-Nur, chapter number 24. But we have to recognize that these are all integral parts of the religion. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, right? If you've ever done a jigsaw puzzle, or if your children have a jigsaw puzzle, and you know it's a 200-piece puzzle, for example, you can't just say, I'm going to leave that one quadrant out. No, the puzzle is only complete when every piece is in its rightful place, right? And Islam is like that. It's like that jigsaw puzzle, right? The worship of Allah is there. The knowledge is there. The akhlaq is there. All of those aspects together make up this beautiful picture of Islam. And if you're missing anything of it, obviously it will be an incomplete picture, right? And we might find, okay, well, in the world, we're getting ahead materialistically, we're getting promotions, we're getting benefits. But obviously, all of this that we do in this world is geared for our outcome in the world to come. So we may not find the full benefit of Islam today. And I touched upon that maybe one of the nights where some of the ayat of the Quran, the Prophet would be asked questions, and he would give a response to try and explain to the Muslims why certain things were wajib or haram. There's some limited examples of that in the Quran. We have books like Ilul al-Shara'i, the late Sheikh As-Sadu, which is, I believe, also available in English, where he provides the rationale behind the Sharia. Right? So Ilul al-Shara'i, the rationale behind the Sharia, based on a hadith that he has compiled. So you might ask, why is this haram? Why is this wajib? Obviously, not all the answers are in the Quran, but if they were ever asked of the Prophet or the Imams, and he was able to compile and find that hadith, that book contains some of the wisdom behind why we follow the religion. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we don't really know the true wisdom behind everything. Right? Just like if you go to a doctor today, as I gave this example, you get a prescription, you get it filled. You have some medication. The doctor may not be able to explain to you the exact chemical compound of that pill and what it does exactly in the body, but obviously it has its own way to, resolve whatever you're feeling, like the COVID vaccine that many of us have taken. You might go online and try to read about what is the ingredients and what is it doing, and you may get a high-level overview understanding of how the vaccine works to, help in the reduce the symptoms if you contract COVID. But ultimately, unless you're at that level of knowledge of how that was developed, we won't understand or appreciate it. So Islam, brothers and sisters, is a similar way. He gave us as much as he knew that we could understand. The Prophet and Imam gave us as much as they thought that we could understand. And other than that, we have to obviously have faith. We have to have iman, that whatever they told us was for our benefit. Because it doesn't benefit Rasulullah to tell us to do something, because it doesn't impact him directly, nor the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. So over these nights, we try to explore that theme, go over the various topics. And as you recall from the second night, when the first night was our introduction, the second night we looked at the topic of the role of the Quran in our lives. And we talked about the fact that we need to, as a community, get past our stage of just recitation of Quran. As I mentioned, the recitation of Quran is extremely important. I mentioned the fact, and we all know that this community has a madrasa, that the weekend school, Sundays, I believe it runs. The Hussain school on Sundays. It's a great place, obviously, for the children to learn the religion, to learn Quran. Recitation of the Quran is obviously our first priority. It should never be that we have a program that does not start with Quran. And we should encourage the young children. I've seen children as young as 3 or 4 reading Quran. So our children have the potential to get to that level. We have to encourage them, teach them, encourage them to read the Quran. But as I said, we don't stop at reading. As Allah says so many times, for example, فَقْرَأُوا مَا تَيَسَّرَ مِنْ, read of the Quran what you can, but then go to the level of reflection, trying to understand the ayat at our level. Obviously, there are ayat which we will never need to use. When Allah says, for example, فَقْتُلُوا الْمُشْرِكِينَ, kill the disbelievers wherever you find them. We don't have to apply that verse today. But when we read a verse that says to help the orphan, of course I can do that today. When a verse says giving charity to the needy, I can do that today. When a verse says to pay the homes, I can do that today. So we have to obviously read the ayat and know which verses are relevant or pertinent to our life. The other ayat which are there, the Quran, which still form the book, but may not be applicable to our life today or our understanding. We read them. We obviously have to understand them in the historical context, why they were revealed. But we move on with that which will benefit us directly. We then looked at the topic of many prophets but one religion. And I stressed upon the fact that Allah sent, as the hadith mentioned of Abu Dhar, that Allah sent 124,000 prophets to guide humanity. And these were sent from the time of Adam all the way down to the final messenger. And we as Muslims, we don't differentiate amongst the prophets, but we say, as the Quran tells us, "La nufarriqu bayna ahadin min ar-rusul," we do not differentiate amongst the prophets. But when Allah differentiates, and Allah tells us there are 5 ulul azm, and when Allah says that there's a final prophet, then obviously we focus on that individual, but that doesn't mean that we do not respect people who follow other religions. And we live in a multicultural, multi-faith society in Saskatoon, in the province of Saskatchewan, in Canada. We have friends, we have neighbors, we have co-workers of other religions. And just because they don't follow our form of Islam, it doesn't mean that we don't, respect them. No, we respect those people. Allah calls the Jewish and Christian community Ahlul Kitab, people of the book. So they have a unique status vis-a-vis the Muslims and even others, whether they be Hindus or Zoroastrians or Sikhs or Buddhists or whatever. We don't see eye to eye with them. Some of them worship idols. But at the end of the day, as the verse we also talked about from Surah Tahrim, if I'm not mistaken, was where Allah told us that He does not prevent us from having good relations with people who have not expelled us from our land, who have not been violently aggressive against us because of our deen, our religion, that we have to, as Allah says, وَتُقْسِطُوا إِلَيْهِمْ, that you deal with them with justice, with fairness, with equality, because in Allah yuhibbul muqsitin. Allah loves those people who deal with others with justice, with fairness. So from there, we looked at the topic of Islam being built upon 5 pillars. You recall the hadith about the 5th Imam, that Islam is built on salat, on zakat, on Soum, on Hajj, and the Walaya. And we said that the Walaya, the mastership, the authority of the Ahlul Bayt is the pinnacle of Islam. It forms our identity as Shia ibn Ashri, obviously, because we have that Walaya. But as you recall, I extended the definition of Walaya. Not that I did it myself, I used the Quran to do it. And we mentioned that verse where Allah says, وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْضٍ يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ وَيُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةَ وَيُؤْتُونَ الزَّكَاةَ, and it went on. But the point we wanted to draw from that is that as mu'mineen, those who are, especially you living here in Saskatoon, we have walaya over one another. Yes, the Ahlul Bayt have walaya over us. The Prophet has walaya over his family, over the Ahlul Bayt. Allah has the ultimate walaya over the Prophet, over the Ahlul Bayt, over us. But the Quran told us that you and I, as mu'minun and mu'minat, men and women believers, we are awliya of one another. Awliya, not a friend, but one who has the right of execution over one another, the right to kind of tell another believer when they're doing wrong. We have Amal bil Ma'ruf, encouraging good, forbidding the evil. And that is a right and an obligation that we have over one another. If I see a fellow believer, brother or sister doing something wrong, and I know it's haram, and I follow the stages of Amal bil Ma'ruf, there are multiple stages, then I go and I speak to them. But obviously, we have to be sure here, brothers and sisters, that when I want to encourage good or forbid evil, I don't do it in a public setting. Right? I don't go on social media and call out a person saying that they've done X, Y, and Z wrong. Right? Or even in the middle of a majlis, for example, I don't go and say something to somebody in front of everybody. No, I take them aside, I speak to them in private. I let them know that, what you're doing is not correct, or how I perceive it to be, at least is not right, and we discuss it. Not that we're trying to point fingers at one another. Not that we're trying to say, well, I'm better than you are because I can tell what you're doing, right? No, it's because we have that wilaya. We have that love for one another. We want it to be that we all get to Jannah together. And we need one another to help one another out. Allah says in the Quran, He says what? He says, وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. Help one another, encourage one another, support one another in goodness and righteousness and piety, and do not encourage or help or promote one another in sin and rebellion. Right? So ultimately, as we're under the wilaya of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, we also have the wilaya with one another, and we have to call one another to goodness. So that was what we looked about at the 5 aspects of religion, or the 5 pillars of this religion. From there, on the 5th night, we looked at the topic of morality. And we talked about the fact that we have to redirect our moral compass. And we spoke about the fact that we live in a secular society, which is Canada. It has its own norms, it has its own ways of doing things. We talked about the fact that Canadian society, for example, the government have made many things legalized in Canada, which are against our religion. They completely contravene Islamic teachings. And there are other things which are part of the normal Canadian culture, or Western culture, we can say, which go against our religion, and we don't perform those. And the example I gave was shaking the hands of a non-Mahram. It's a part of our Canadian culture, obviously before COVID times. Today it's different. But that physical handshake, although you and I may think, well, it's a very innocent touch. I don't mean anything by it. The woman doesn't have any ill intentions why she's shaking my hand. But the fact about it is that Islam has made certain things prohibited. Right? We have a concept that prevention is better than cure. It's better to prevent any form of challenge to our faith or breaking the rules of Allah by keeping away from the sin or the areas of the arenas where sin takes place, rather than have to then deal with it later on, right? The prime example also we have is when people say, well, I have a meeting at work, and they're having the meeting at a restaurant or at a bar, right? Or let's even a restaurant, a non-Muslim, non-halal restaurant, but they serve alcohol. Can I go there? It's a team meeting for work. And I had those when I worked in corporate Canada as well, but luckily we had so many Muslims on our team that our manager would automatically gravitate, and she would find us halal restaurants to have our team meetings in. So we didn't have to worry about the meat, the food, and we didn't have to worry about alcohol. Right? But we have to recognize that for us to, as believers, to sit at a table where alcohol is being served is haram. Even though I'm not drinking, it's still haram for me to physically sit at that table. Now you might say, well, I have a lot of willpower. I come and do matam every year. I'm not going to drink alcohol, right? And maybe you're right. You maybe will never be tempted to take a sip. But the point is that Islam wants us to ensure that we're never in an area of temptation, that we don't even come close to it. And let me tell you, if I have time still have time. Let me tell you that if you put your foot down and you have a firm moral stance from day one, it will carry you with you at work. I'll give you an example of my own self. So when we had gone to Budapest, Hungary for work with BlackBerry, myself and 4 co-workers, all non-Muslims, all who very openly drank alcohol, obviously because it's a common thing. a point came in our trip when we were leaving to come back to Canada that the company that we're working with in Budapest, they wanted to take us out for dinner. And I knew that it was a very strong secular country, that it would be hard for them to find a place for me to go to eat, although we found halal restaurants owned by some Pakistani brothers in Budapest, and it was all halal. But at the end of the day, they obviously wanted to go to a place that served alcohol. And so I excused myself. I said, you know what? You guys go ahead. I have to pack my suitcase, whatever, and we'll meet at the hotel and we'll fly back together. They first of all made it a point. They asked me why I didn't want to come, and I explained the food issue and the alcohol issue. They found a place, and again, they found that one halal restaurant, or one of the two that didn't serve alcohol. We ate there. And my coworkers asked me why we don't, associate around alcohol. And I gave them some reasons. But the point which I want to get to is that on our way back from Budapest through Amsterdam to Toronto, we got to Amsterdam, we had about a 5-hour layover, so we had access to the business class lounge. And I'm sitting at a table drinking my coffee and having whatever was in the lounge. And one of my coworkers, who has a glass of beer in his hand, he comes up and there's no other tables to sit at. He says, "Can I sit at the table here?" I said, "It's a free country, you can sit wherever you want." He says, "No, I have a glass of alcohol and I know that your religion doesn't allow you to sit at a table with people who drink, so I wanted to ask your permission if I'm okay to sit at the chair." A non-Muslim who has no need to even, have that formality, but he recognized the fact that, not that I'm uncomfortable around alcohol, I'm not scared of it, but he recognized as a religion, but we don't follow, we don't associate in that area. And so he asked me if he was okay to sit down at a chair beside me in my area and drink his alcohol. Right? But because I put that seed in from day one, and I respectfully told them these are my limits, alhamdulillah, they maintain them. So it's not impossible for us, if we live and work in this society, to keep those limitations, to let them know that we're outgoing, we can go out for dinner, but we have certain limits. And I'm sure they will play within those limits. So that's what we talked about in that redirect our moral compass, to ensure that we also recognize those aspects of our religion. And the fact that these are teachings there to make our life more peaceful, more tranquil, not to give us headache and stress in life, but to really regulate our lives. From there, on the night that followed, we talked about the fact that we tried to answer the question that are morals relative or are they fixed? And we looked at the fact that there are times in Islam when the moral teaching will always stay the same. Like riba, for example, is always haram, backbiting is always haram, but that sometimes there are exceptions to the rule. Let me give us some of the examples. But generally speaking, the rule is always there. The subject is always either a prohibition or something which is permissible. But then there could be times when the examples within there will change depending on the time and space that we're in. And so we said that we can't say that morals are completely relative. They're fixed by Allah, but there is room for some divergence depending on the situation that we find ourselves in. From there, we looked at the topic over 2 nights about following the fiqh of Islam. We talked about that, the fact that this religion is a religion of rules. Just like video games have rules, board games have rules, our kids who play sports, they have rules to follow. And rules regulate our life. We have rules to drive a car, so on and so forth. And that the rules of Islam are in place to make our lives easier. They're there to give a sense of order and balance. And I mentioned the fact, and I hope you remember that knowing the rules of Islam doesn't make life more difficult. It actually makes life easier. Because now you know wajib from haram, you know if you make a mistake, how to fix it, you know the limits of what we can do as a Muslim. And so when you learn the rules, then it actually gives you more freedom to work within them. Right? But if you don't know the rules, then you may be very, in a state of always being kind of not knowing what to do. You might have some kind of level of OCD or some kind of a disorder where you're always doubting, for example. But once you learn the rules, then life becomes much easier in Islam because now you know exactly what you can do, what you can't do, and you know the limitations, and so you play within those rules and those boundaries. We also talked about all this within that, the need to follow the marja'iyat, and I don't give rulings, or I don't give names of who to follow. We all have a different marja that we follow, and as long as you have picked your marja based on your own ability to determine who is the most knowledgeable, and that mujtahid is a scholar that is recognized in the scholarly community, that other maraja recognize that person, that he has reached that level, then you're free to choose whoever you wish, but again, to follow the rules of that individual. We also then looked at the next slide is how do we derive our rulings? So that was a bit more of a technical discussion. But the one thing that we tried to get out through that discussion is the fact that when our ulama, when the maraja taqleed sit and determine the rulings, determine meaning they look at the Quran and the Hadith and try to determine our obligation, not that they create rulings on their own. But when they do that, they do so with a great deal of precaution, a great deal of research and investigation. And I give you the example that there are times when our maraja don't know a ruling. Right? Like I gave the example of cryptocurrencies, that maraja don't know what the ruling is. The two major marajas, Sayyid Khamenei and Sayyid Sistani, don't have a fatwa because it's something so new for them today that they haven't been able to determine the permissibility or impermissibility, and so they give us a precaution ruling. But that shows us that, our ulama, although they live thousands of kilometers away in Iran or Iraq or other parts of the world, that they're not out of touch with society. We tend to think, oh, they're so out of the world and they're not relatable to us, right? And then they don't know what's happening in the world. But no, they know what's happening, and the fact that they give rulings on medical issues, they give rulings on mortgages, on lotteries, on raffles, on all of these areas shows that they are constantly being updated and aware of what's going on, and it just will take them some time to come to a conclusion on, let's say, crypto or whatever comes up in the future. And then from there, when we began to round off the discussion in the last night or two, we looked at the topic of living Islam faithfully and ethically. Life, L-I-F-E, living Islam faithfully and ethically. The fact that we put all of this together, the ahkam, the akhlaq, the aqaid, and we become faithful to Islam. We recognize our responsibility living in North America and Canada. We fulfill our obligations, obviously, to the best of our ability. We maintain our religion at the morally sound level. And that in and of itself, first of all, showing concern for our own selves, as the verse mentioned, "Qu anfusakum," save your own selves from the fire of hell, "Wa ahlikum," and then save your families from the hellfire. That we have to follow that order. That I can't expect, for example, today to take on the world. I can't expect to become a mubaligh or a teacher of Islam and my own family is suffering, that my wife is not having her needs met, my children don't see dad ever because he's out conquering the world and trying to convert the whole of Saskatoon to become Muslim. No, we start with our lives, with our personal life, make sure that we are on track. We move on to our family, that's our next obligation as men and as women. The mothers, obviously, they have to take care of their own lives. They have to fulfill their own wajibat, their own obligations, then of their spouse, of their children, and then you can move on. But you can't expect to convert and change the world when you can't even change yourself. So there has to be an internal revolution and reformation, and then from there comes the external movement to change the world. And this is really how it has to go. And we will see, inshallah, that if we can fulfill this kind of process, this method, that we will be able to change people. We may not convert them today or tomorrow, right? But you have the example of Hur, for example. Imam Hussain alayhi salam didn't give up on Hur from day one. We have other examples in Islamic history where the Prophet worked on certain people for months or years. We have examples of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. We may even have examples of friends or family who maybe aren't Muslims or aren't on the path of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. And through working with them, talking to them, guiding them slowly, one by one, that we can bring them to the teachings of Islam. Not because we need more Muslims, we don't need more people. The religion doesn't need more people, but obviously it benefits them as a human being, and ultimately it will benefit community, and the entire society. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
And that really, in a nutshell, was these last 10 nights. It was really about, if I put it in a nutshell, in a few words, it was just about changing ourselves. And then ultimately, if you go back to the mission statement of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, when he leaves Medina to go to Mecca, and he writes that famous last will to his half brother Muhammad al-Hanafiya, this is what he said, right? He said, I'm not going to create corruption. إِنِّي لَمْ أَخْرُجْ أَشِرًا وَلَا بَطِرًا وَلَا ظَالِمًا وَلَا مُفْسِدًا. I'm not going out to create sedition and corruption and problems. No, he said, إِنَّمَا خَرَجْتُ لِطَلَبِ الْإِصْلَاحِ بِأُمَّةِ جَدِّ. I'm going forth to bring about a reformation in the ummah, in the nation of my grandfather. I want to do Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar, and I'm following in the seerah of my grandfather and my father. So his movement was about reforming the ummah, reforming each and every single individual in the community. Because if the community were to be reformed, then we would not have to worry about corrupt governments. The only reason why Banu Umayyah took over is because of the fact of the corruption of the minds of the Muslims, that they allowed the Banu Umayyah to take a stand of power and authority, which had the Muslims been purified and had the religion of Islam in their hearts, we wouldn't be where we are today. And where are we today? We commemorated the day of Ashura just a few days ago. We recall the tragedy at Karbala. But you know, as I'm sure we've heard umpteen times from the Mimbar, that Karbala did not end on the 10th of Muharram. 10th of Muharram, the day of Ashura, obviously was the greatest day of tragedy. Right? Even the ziyarah that we recite on Ashura day, we recite the ziyarah of Ashura, and we refer to it as the greatest of tragedies, the greatest day of the greatest tragedy. But as I mentioned, even on the Shama Ghariba nights, that was a night of great sadness and sorrow. That was the night of that evening where the tents were looted, where the tents were burnt of Ahlul Bayt, where Imam Sajjad's life alayhi salam was in peril, in jeopardy, and Bibi Zainab alayhi salam, she came as the mother figure of the family, and she stood in front of the cursed shimmer, and she safeguarded the life of the fourth Imam. But we recall that it was the day of Ashura after the tragedy that the heads were severed from the bodies. It was that evening of Shama Ghariba that after the tents had been burned, that the Ahlul Bayt had nowhere to go that night. They were stuck in the desert at night under the cold. The enemy troops were there partying, were celebrating, were enjoying the so-called victory they got. But as I said, brothers and sisters, that the tragedy didn't stop there. You know, the historians say, the books of Maqtal, especially if you want to refer to one of them in English, the late Sheikh Abbas al-Qummi has a book called Nafasul Mahmum. It's available online, in which he details some of the tragedies that happened after Karbala. He mentions the fact that the Ahlul Bayt were there on the 11th of Muharram. The whole day of the 11th and the night of the 11th, they were in Karbala. And it wasn't until the day of the 12th of Muharram, after the time of Dhuhr, that the curse of Umar ibn Sa'd Mal'un, he began to get ready to take the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam from Karbala to Kufa. You know, I was thinking about this, that many of us have been to the walk from Najaf to Karbala. Many of you, I'm sure, have been given this divine opportunity, this blessing from Abu Abdullah, from Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, to walk from Najaf all the way to Karbala, from father to son, from shaheed to shaheed, from martyr to martyr. And you know, when you go on that walk, and I've never been there, but may Allah give us all the tawfiq to go on the walk from Najaf to Karbala. But the videos we see are of people giving food to the Zawar of Abu Abdullah, giving water, giving chai, giving foot massage, a place to sleep, a place to rest. And how much luxury and comfort we have as we go to meet our master. But can you imagine on that 12th of Muharram when Bibi Zainab alayhi salam, when Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, they didn't have that treatment. They didn't have the ability to stop every few kilometers and have a drink of water, to have some food, to have some drink, to have their feet massaged. No, the historians mention that the way that they were taken on the 12th of Muharram, after the Asr, after the Dhuhr on the day of the 12th of Muharram, was that they were forced to not just leave Karbala, but they were actually forced to go through the Qatl-e-Gah, through the ground of the Shahadats. And as they were walking and they would see the blood of Karbala, the Shuhada, they saw the bodies of those of Banu Hashim who weren't allowed to be buried. The curse of Eid al-Ibn Ziyad, the governor of Kufa, he's told that the family of Rasulullah, the women and children are coming closer. And so he orders the city to become decorated. He orders the city to become all clean and decorated. He tells the people that there were a group of rebels who had rebelled against the Khalifa, and we have put down their revolution, and that they're going to come into the city. And in that time, before the Ahl al-Bayt come in, they take all the heads of the Shuhada. All of the heads of the Shuhada of Karbala are taken, they're mounted on spears, and they're put at very precise places within the city of Kufa. Because the plan is for the family of Rasulullah, for the women, for the children, to be paraded to the bazaar of Kufa, to go through the streets of Kufa, and those heads will be prominently displayed to warn the people, to act as a threat to the people that if you rebel against the Yazid, if you rebel against the Khalifa of your time, that this is the outcome that you will find. And brothers and sisters, finally, as the caravan of Abu Abdullah, as the caravan of his son Sayyid al-Sajjad, as the caravan of Bibi Zainab alayhi salam, as they began to enter into the city of Kufa, the heads are placed amongst the caravan, and they're paraded through the bazaars of Kufa. The same Kufa that Bibi Zainab alayhi salam used to live in. She used to give dars of Quran, tafsir of Quran to the women. This is the same Kufa now that is seeing Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam in a way they've never seen her before. Her hijab has been taken away. The children are in a different state. The fourth Imam is bleeding from all of the wounds on his body of the chains. And as they walk through the streets of Kufa, people began to mock them. People began to insult them. People began to curse at them. Some people began to throw things at them. And eventually a group of women see these people. And one of the women who's standing on top of a rooftop, she says to Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam, she says that you captives, from what evil community are you from? She doesn't know who these people are. She's never seen Sayyidah Zainab in this way. And when Sayyidah Zainab says that we are the family of Muhammad, we are the progeny of Ali Muhammad, This woman feels grief and remorse. She brings all the hijabs and whatever covering she has to give it to Zainab, to give to the other women, for them to be covered as they walk through the streets of Kufa, for them to have at least some level of the dignity that they have deserved as they are of the family of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون.
Ya Hussein. सो रहे हैं सब मेरे वाली पर रेत पर सो रहे हैं सब मेरे वाली पर रेत पर सो रहे हैं सब मेरे वाली पर रेत पर सो रहे हैं सब सो रहे हैं सब मेरे वाली बानों बैठी ही रहेगी जिंदगी भर रेत पर सो रहे हैं सब मेरे वाली रेत पर सो रहे हैं सब मेरे वाली पर रेत पर होती चादर साया करती हाय कितनी धूप है होती चादर साया करती हाय कितनी धूप है सो रहा है आग के मैदान में अकबर रेत पर सो रहे हैं सब मेरे वाली दिल पर रेत पर सो रहे हैं सब मेरे वाली दिल पर रेत पर सो रहे हैं सब मेरे वाली दिल पर रेत पर चूल्हा तेरा जल गया तो क्या हुआ ऐ मेरे लाल चूल्हा तेरा जल गया तो क्या हुआ ऐ मेरे लाल लोरियां दूंगी तुझे आ जाल कर रेत पर सो रहे हैं सब मेरे वाली दिल पर रेत पर सो रहे हैं सब मेरे वाली दिल पर रेत पर बानों बैठी ही रहेगी जिंदगी भर से आती हो नींद, बाप के सीने पे दर्रा कर्ज से आती हो नींद, कैसे सोए शाह की वो नन्ही दुख्तर रेत पर, सो रहे हैं सब मेरे वाली दिल पर रेत पर, सो रहे हैं सब मेरे वाली दिल पर रेत पर, मानो बैठी ही रहेगी जिंदगी भर रेत पर, सो रहे हैं सब मेरे वाली दिल पर रेत पर, गाँव से 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 गाँव से
आगे बीमारी आंखों से नूर का नहीं, आगे बीमारी आंखों से नूर का नहीं, आगे बीमारी आंखों से नूर। जिसको ज़ैनब के लिए, जिसको ज़ैनब के लिए पर्दा कहीं मिलता नहीं, आबिदे आंखों से नूर का नहीं, आबिदे बीमार की आंखों से नूर का नहीं, आबिदे बीमार की आंखों से नूर का नहीं। देखो ना मेरा तमाशा रोके आबिद ने कहा, साथ मेरे आई है रोके वो कैदी बेटा, नंगे सर जिसको कभी, नंगे सर जिसको कभी बाबा ने भी देखा नहीं, आबिदे बीमार की आंखों से नूर का नहीं, आबिदे बीमार की आंखों से नूर का नहीं। गम न करना तू सकीना सफर में ज़ैनब के साथ, सीने पे सो जाना माँ के जब भी हो जाएगी रात, लौट कर आएगा लौट कर आएगा बेटी तेरा बाबा नहीं, आबिदे बीमार की आंखों से नहीं, आबिदे बीमार की आंखों से नहीं, आबिदे बीमार की आंखों से नहीं। डर से सहमी है सकीना खून खानों से रमा, कुछ भी दिखला के आबिद को तमाचों के निशान, कब वतन में जाएंगे, कब वतन में जाएंगे, कोई यहाँ अपना नहीं, आबिदे बीमार की आंखों से नूर का नहीं, आबिदे बीमार की आंखों से नूर का नहीं, आबिदे बीमार की आंखों से नूर का नहीं। देखती मासूम बच्चों की न ज़ैनब प्यास को, देता जो जन की इजाज़त भाई तू अब्बास को, एक अपन रहता न तू, एक अपन रहता न तू, पर्दा मेरा लुटता नहीं, आबिदे की आंखों से खून रुकता नहीं, आबिद बीमार की आंखों से खून रुकता नहीं। जिसको ज़ैनब के लिए, जिसको ज़ैनब के लिए पर्दा कहीं मिलता नहीं, आबिद बीमार की आंखों से खून रुकता नहीं, आबिद बीमार की आंखों से खून रुकता नहीं, आबिद बीमार। या हुसैन, या हुसैन, या हुसैन, या हुसैन, या हुसैन, या हुसैन, या हुसैन। शम्मा से शम्मा जले, सिलसिला जारी रहे, हम रहे या ना रहे, ये आज़ादी रहे। शम्मा से शम्मा जले, सिलसिला जारी रहे, हम रहे या ना रहे, ये आज़ादी रहे। शम्मा से शम्मा जले, सिलसिला जारी रहे, हम रहे या ना रहे, ये आज़ादी रहे। शम्मा से शम्मा जले, अपनी नस्लों को सिखाते रहो मातम का हुनर, सीना दर सीना करे बस ये आज़ादी सफर। जैसे हालात ही हो रस्म ये जारी रहे, हम रहे या ना रहे, ये आज़ादी रहे। शम्मा से शम्मा जले, सिलसिला जारी रहे, हम रहे या ना रहे, ये आज़ादी रहे। शम्मा से शम्मा जले, रात बदले ये ज़माना कीड़ बिछोड़ मौसम, एक पल भी ना रुके अश्के अज़ा और मातम। मातमे शह का जुनून ज़हन पर तारी रहे, हम रहे या ना रहे, ये आज़ादी रहे। शम्मा से शम्मा जले, सिलसिला जारी रहे, हम रहे या ना रहे, ये आज़ादी रहे। शम्मा से शम्मा जले, अपने घर में भी अज़ाखाना सजाना है मुझे, अपने बच्चों को आज़ादार बनाना है मुझे, ताकि इस नस्ल में भी ताज़िया जारी रहे, हम रहे या ना रहे, ये आज़ादी रहे। शम्मा से शम्मा जले, सिलसिला जारी रहे, हम रहे या ना रहे, ये आज़ादी रहे। शम्मा से शम्मा जले, दुनिया वालों की ना परवाह न कुछ बात करो, मानती बेड़ियां सजा के हमने पहनो, बोल के फर्शे अज़ाब गिरिया हो जारी रहे, हम रहे या ना रहे, ये आज़ादी रहे। शम्मा से शम्मा जले, सिलसिला जारी रहे, हम रहे या ना रहे, ये आज़ादी हाँ चले अपनी नस्लों को सिखाते रहो मातम का हुनर सीना दर सीना करे बस ये आजादारी सफर जैसे हालात भी हो हम ये जारी रहे हम रहे या ना रहे ये आजादारी रहे शम्मा से शम्मा चले सिलसिला जारी रहे हम रहे या ना रहे ये आजादारी रहे शम्मा से शम्मा चले तुम अगर साकिर शफीर हो ये याद रहे चाहे इस गम के लिए सर भी कटे कर भी चले हुर्मते फर्शे अज़ा शान से प्यारी रहे हम रहे या ना रहे ये आजादी रहे शम्मा से शम्मा चले सिलसिला जारी रहे हम रहे या ना रहे ये आजादी रहे शम्मा से शम्मा चले ये सबीले यूं ही आबाद रहे अहले अज़ा और घर घर पे नजर आए अलम गाजी का ये अलम ऊंचा रहे ये अलमदारी रहे हम रहे या ना रहे ये आजादारी रहे शम्मा से शम्मा चले सिलसिला जारी रहे हम रहे या ना रहे ये आजादारी रहे शम्मा से शम्मा चले सिलसिला जारी रहे हम रहे या ना रहे ये आजादारी रहे शम्मा से शम्मा चले या हुसैन या हुसैन
शफी का मातम है तंजीम हुसैनी है शफी का मातम है तंजीम हुसैनी है शबीर का मातम है तंजीम हुसैनी है शबीर का मातम है तंजीम हुसैनी है अब्बास का परचम है तंजीम हुसैनी है अब्बास का परचम है तंजीम हुसैनी है शबीर का मातम है तंजीम